Old Mutual will not back down from its dispute with dismissed CEO Peter Moyo. This comes as the chairperson, Trevor Manuel, unpacked the company's side of the story in Sandton today. The insurer has confirmed that it has sent a letter to Moyo's attorneys saying it would not seek further court intervention on the firing of the CEO. Moyo turned up for work on Monday morning following his second victory in court regarding his termination as CEO. He was, however, prevented from resuming his duties. The saga continues with Old Mutual being granted leave to appeal the ruling by Judge Michele on the first dismissal of Moyo. Well, for more on this story, I've got my colleague Mbalentle Mtetwa in studio who's been covering this particular story. Mbali, very interesting story, very interesting developments. So as far as Old Mutual is concerned, the chapter about Mr. Moyo being CEO at Old Mutual is now closed.
Yes, we heard the board chairperson, Trevor Manuel, addressing to the media and talking to them about telling them that Peter Moyo is no longer in the employ of Old Mutual, saying that he can come into the building and have coffee on the ground floor and possibly have a meeting in the boardroom that's on the first floor rather, but he cannot enter the building because he's no longer in the employ. However, when he was asked about the court judgment that basically reinstated Peter Moyo as early as last week Friday and an earlier one which was upheld from earlier in July, he said that they are not ignoring the judgment. However, they welcome the fact that Judge Michele has granted them leave to appeal the judgment, and they will be going ahead and appealing it. But until then, he is not in the employ of Old Mutual, and therefore he is not allowed to enter the building or to come into Old Mutual.
So in their appeal process, if they were to fail, then how would they be able to account for the interim period when they haven't allowed Mr. Moyo to go to work?
It's very interesting because this creates a situation where they are in contempt of court for not having basically implemented what the judge had, the initial court ruling, and allowed him to come into the building and proceed with his services, to provide his services to Old Mutual. There is an offer on the table to allow him to work from home. However, Trevor Manuel has obviously dismissed this, saying that he is definitely not in the employ. He still maintains that he is not in the employ of Old Mutual, and therefore there's no need for him to be working from home or anything for that matter. But we know at the heart of this is the conflict of interest. We know that he was initially suspended in May and later fired in June over a conflict of interest that involves a company that Old Mutual has shares in and that he's also a shareholder in. And this is about unpaid preferential dividends, and that is at the core of the matter. And he started off the address by basically telling the media about what happened, how they came to know about these preferential, the ordinary dividends being paid out to 4 shareholders of 105 million rand that was paid out, and that without having paid the preferential shares of court dividends, of course. And he said that they had an encounter and they had a board meeting where they tried to engage Moyo to find out about it. But what's interesting about that is that they had a representative from Old Mutual. His name is Mubashir Patel. He was the person who was supposed to have been looking out for Old Mutual's interest. And when he was asked during the press briefing if he has the minutes or a transcript of the meeting where the dividends were being discussed and what input this Mr. Patel had, he didn't seem to have an answer. He didn't really come out to say, no, this is what happened and so on. But this is also something that came out during the initial court battle, the urgent application to have the initial axing ruled as unlawful.
Mbali, did you get to speak to Peter Moyo after the press briefing by Trevor Manuel to get his response on this?
No, but I did speak to him earlier this week, and when I spoke to him earlier this week, he seemed very keen to go back to work, and he said that he's aware of his position in the company, and he knows what his role is, and he has never overstepped. And he said that Trevor Manuel has somewhat wanted to run the organization and overstep his duties. And he said this goes against, good governance, because everyone has these distinct roles in a company, and this obviously, enforces good governance in a company.
So if Old Mutual say it's a foregone conclusion and Mr. Moyo is fired and they don't expect him to return to work anymore, why haven't they appointed a permanent CEO?
That's very interesting because the initial judgment, going back to the initial judgment when Moyo's acting was ruled unlawful, he also interdicted Old Mutual from hiring a new, replacing him and hiring his replacement. And that obviously got Trevor Manuel in hot water this morning because he talked about how the board has been hamstring and they can't do anything because they can't hire a new CEO based on a decision that has been made by a man in a robe. And we heard one of the journalists asking him to retract that, saying that he will be in contempt of court for having said that. But it creates a situation where it's almost as though there's very little respect for the judgment and for the initial ruling, because he says there's very little respect, even though they say that they're not ignoring the judgment and they do respect the courts, but it just creates a sense of very little respect for the initial judgment and for the judge himself having said that. But it's a good thing that he did retract that statement.
Well, I'm sure you're going to have to catch up with Mr. Moyo to get his response on today's briefing. Thank you so much, Mbali, for your time. My colleague there, Mbalentle Mthethwa, just giving us an update on the Peter Moyo case. Cars